and as a consequence of that are producing increased levels of undesired IgG4 antibodies. Can they treat that in any way? This is the topic of our today's video. My name is Dr. Mikołaj Rashek of Neurogenomics. I've made a series of videos dedicated to these unusual IgG4 antibodies that have been observed in certain individuals who have received mRNA vaccines. It's not seen in everyone. There has to be a certain order of both vaccination versus infection in order for this to be observed. In essence, literally what this appears to be doing is building tolerance towards the spike protein. And we yet do not know what the clinical consequences of that are. But clearly, I was also interested, in case this is bad news, how can we be treating this? And that's what I've assembled for this video. So first, let's talk about what we already know about diseases where there is high level of IgG4 antibodies. We did talk about that as well in the past. We're talking about IgG4 related diseases. And talking with experts on this topic, what we are learning is that IgG4 antibodies, it's potentially very valuable to know these levels, because individuals who have high levels of these IgG4 antibodies, they might not present clinical symptoms for a very long time. So it's similar to, say, cancer. Imagine if you have cancer, you might have cancer growing without knowing that at all and without presenting any clinical symptoms. And yet there is damage going on inside. And it's a similar thing with these IgG4 related antibodies. Organs can be damaged without a person being any wiser, because there is no clinical symptoms. So that brings me now to measurement of IgG4 antibodies. And that's something that is potentially very valuable to measure. It's valuable for people who have IgG4 related diseases. And the reason why is because it can tell you about the progression of the disease, as well as whether treatments are working. And we'll be talking about that in just one moment. And also, this also might be extremely valuable to people who have decided to take mRNA vaccine without knowledge of prior infection. So if you have measured your IgG4 antibody levels, please let me know which company you've used. I'd like to assemble that information. What are the companies that could be used in order for vaccinated individuals to start learning this? We need to start getting to the bottom of this. Is this a potential problem or not? Are these levels on the rise? And the reason why it's important to know, because it appears there is a way to treat it and potentially mitigate serious issues. So again, if you have been vaccinated with mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, you might consider measuring your blood levels of IgG4 circulating antibodies. And that's why I'm asking anyone who might have already taken such test, share the information and let us know which companies you've used. I'd like to track this information and we'll see, maybe I'll be able to assemble something. Maybe, it really depends. Anyway, it's very valuable information to know. So that's how you can track this information to see whether there is a trouble brewing because of this particular vaccines, and it's more like the order of vaccination. So it's not in everyone, it's depending on circumstances and depending whether a person was infected first or not. and whether boosters were used or not. You can check out past videos to learn more about this specifically, okay? So now let's talk about the treatments. That's one of the reasons why IgG4 levels, antibody levels, are measured in individuals that are diagnosed with IgG4 related diseases, because that can inform whether they can go on treatments. And there's two standard treatments. First one we're gonna mention are glucocorticoids. So these are steroid treatments, and this is the number one standard therapy treatment as far as I understand. So this information is based, of course, my discussions with certain experts in this area and reading literature. Remember, this is always subject to change. But the problem with the steroid treatments, that in approximately 1/3 or maybe 40% of individuals, while the treatment always appears to be working immediately, about 40% of individuals will relapse from such treatment. So that means the antibody levels will come back. So that's an issue with that particular treatment. And that brings us to the second most popular treatment, which is a use of specific antibody. Now this antibody, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. It's something like rituximab. Okay, we're gonna put a spelling of that just in case, because maybe I'm not even saying that right. But how does this antibody work? It recognizes specific antigen on B cells called CD20, okay? So antigen basically means antibody target. So this antibody recognizes a specific molecule on top of B cells. What are B cells? B cells are the type of cells that eventually will lead to generation of cells that produce antibodies. So B cells are like progenitors of eventual development of antibodies. And this molecule CD20 is specifically present on the type of B cells that will lead to the production of IgG4 antibodies. So if you treat with this rituximab antibody, you will kill those cells. And as a consequence, you can clean that up. So it's very effective. These cells will die, and you can literally remove the population of cells from circulation that would lead to development of IgG4 antibodies. So very, very effective. The only problem with this treatment is its cost. It's quite expensive. So check out this beautiful glacier behind me with a beautiful glacier lake. All right, so those are the two main treatments. But now let's talk about maybe some natural methods. So for me, of personal interest was, and I researched this and I wrote an article on this topic from a blog recently, and that was to find out, could you use fasting to remove IgG4 antibodies? And I could not find any information about this at all. And the only information I was able to find specifically to IgG4 antibodies, I could not find any information. But I did discover that fasting can indeed reduce the levels of IgG antibodies as a whole, so all subtypes. And that information came from study of Ramadan participants, so people who practice obviously Ramadan fasting for religious purposes. And that's basically all of the studies I was able to find come from the regions of the world where Ramadan is practiced, and all the science information comes from those particular studies. So, and these studies show that fasting during Ramadan, and this is fairly serious fasting, because literally you don't eat or drink anything from sunrise to sunset, if I understand this correctly. And forgive me if if I'm getting this slightly wrong. And there's numerous studies that show that IgG antibodies in general, as a whole, all types, can be substantially decreased. I'm just waiting for the wind to pass. So that's about fasting. And the next method, natural method, that was of interest to me is natural infection with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And that actually also brings another very interesting point about Dr. Bosch and whether maybe his theory is wrong. And I'll talk about that in just a moment as well. So, what about natural infections? So, the paper I want to discuss showed that there is a problem with imprinting. And imprinting basically means is that once you are either vaccinated or infected, you program your body or your immune system to respond in the same manner when it encounters future infections. And the more unrelated the future variant is, the more distant it is from the first one that hits you, the more likely you will respond with the type of antibodies that were imprinted in your immune system from that very first infection. So that's imprinting, and that basically means you respond with antibodies that are not very effective. So these authors wanted to see what is the effect of imprinting on the current Omicron infections and reinfections that we're seeing. They studied that both in mice as well as people who experience multiple Omicron infections, and it was very interesting results. Why did they study this? And this is what I found very fascinating, because they mention right at the beginning of this article, they mentioned something super interesting. They said that I don't think I even was able to hear a year ago. And they mentioned, look, the virus is clearly evolving rapidly. We do all know that. We still keep seeing different type of variants popping up. And why is that? What is driving this? And they flat out say it's because of the humoral immune response, meaning antibodies. So this is the first time where I saw this type of statement being made that, hey, the antibodies that the virus is encountering, antibodies we're producing, is driving its evolution. I made videos on this, what is driving the immune escape of the virus, meaning what drove the evolution of the virus in order for it to change so dramatically and so rapidly. And I talked about theories about that. And at the time when I made those videos, no one really wanted to even mention such words. So we clearly are changing our stance, and we're finally coming back to more of a scientific reality of things that we run away from for a while, because I don't know why. We got very nervous to talk about potential causes. And we really did not want to, for some reason, one reason or another, we did not want to be implicating antibodies as a potential factor causing the virus evolution. But here it is. These guys flat out say it as if it's the most normal thing in the world. And I haven't seen that yet in literature. So obviously it struck me. So I wanted to mention that to you as well. So what they did is these guys, they immunized mice, and they gave mice vaccine shots. They used CoronaVac as well as mRNA vaccines. And they showed that once mice were immunized with vaccine against the wild type original strain that we humans were also immunized with, if such mice subsequently were immunized later on with against Omicron variant, they predominantly responded with antibodies targeting that original wild type strain. This is also what we kind of have seen with the updated boosters, Omicron boosters. And why they did not work very well, because pretty much the same reason, the immune imprinting, and we made videos on that as well. Nice. And however, what was interesting is that when they did another booster, second booster shot that was Omicron related, that actually restored the mouse antibodies to be able to start neutralizing infection with Omicron viruses. So this is really interesting, because what they basically were saying is that, okay, the first hit with Omicron booster was not positive response, but the second one did, and it really what it really helped is the mice were able to finally start switching into the production of antibodies that were targeting Omicron variants. Now they also looked at what they also did is they looked at human cohorts who were vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So that's interesting that and it's a good thing they decided to use unvaccinated as well as a control. And people who were infected with various Omicron variants. And what they were seeing is that after first infection with Omicron variants, the antibodies that these individuals were producing were once again predominantly made to target the wild type. So if these individuals were vaccinated and they were infected with Omicron variant, their primary response was to produce antibodies that would attack the original wild type, and therefore they were not very effective against Omicron. Hence, immune imprinting was really causing an issue here. But if they were reinfected later on, again with another later version of Omicron, once again, these individuals started to show levels of antibodies that were started to be effective against Omicron. So what does this mean? It means that these individuals, their B cells were starting to transform and change themselves to be able to finally recognize the Omicron, and these B cells were starting to change to start producing antibodies that once again could start neutralizing Omicron variants. So, and this was very, very evident. However, I'll add here that unvaccinated individuals, their imprinting was not as strong as vaccinated individuals. So unvaccinated individuals, their response and transition towards recognition of Omicron variants was much more potent and stronger. So that was also interesting. So what does this mean? It means that these B cells are switching again to start recognizing, they're changing themselves. So our own immune system is mutating itself to be able to eventually start recognizing Omicron variants. We are now producing antibodies that are recognizing Omicron variants, and it's helping us deal with these latest variants. Now, why is that a good news for the IgG4 antibodies? Is because clearly we are shifting the number of B cells that are no longer producing antibodies against the wild type strain, the one that started the pandemic, the one that is not even around anymore. And we are now producing more B cells that are recognizing latest variant. And that would mean that we are also having less and less, or it should mean that we should have fewer and fewer B cells that would be responsible also for production of these IgG4 antibodies. So that's the potential good news, is that naturally, because of these reinfections with Omicron, we actually might eventually drive down the production of IgG4 antibodies. So that's the good news. But this also brings me to another very interesting question. And remember, Dr. Gerd van den Bosch, whom we've been following quite closely, and the reason why is because he was one of the first individuals who successfully predicted that we were very likely going to see immune escape, which is exactly what happened with the Omicron. So because he was one of those few individuals who was warning about that, we've been following his science very closely, his writings. It's not published, it's in scientific journals. It's published strictly in on his blog, but nevertheless, I've been following this, and he's been making some dire predictions that the virus very likely is going to mutate eventually to be more pathogenic, and there will be dire consequences. And this brings me to this question, because obviously very, very dark predictions, unwelcome predictions. And could this event, where we are now changing our productions of antibodies to indeed recognize Omicron variant, would that not kibosh his theory? Because clearly that means we can start neutralizing the virus once again. And I would love for him to be able to respond to this particular publication and see how that fits his theory or not, because obviously I've been attempting to find any evidence I could possibly find to contradict his theory, because obviously no one wants this theory to come true, right? Including himself. He's just quite adamant that he thinks that is what's going to happen. So I would love to know whether this might actually not, well, really contradict his theory or not. I cannot pretend that I have the grasp of all of the knowledge that he publishes, because it's that complicated, that complex, and I would love to know what he's got to say. But I'm hoping that maybe this is the evidence that this means that the warning and his dire predictions of what might be happening with the vaccinated individuals is incorrect. And by the way, in one of the interviews that I've heard from him in recently, the antibodies that are partially responsible for the immune escape by steric immune refocusing, as he calls it. He calls these antibodies polyclonal non-neutralizing antibodies. He also admitted that he expects that these are exactly the same as IgG4 antibodies. And if these are responsible for causing these issues, including lack of training our innate immunity, which is the primary immunity that he believes and claims, and I would tend to agree with what I've been studying scientifically, is mostly responsible for clearing our viruses, and why this is going to be a problem for the vaccinated. Well, if these antibodies are also disappearing, well, wouldn't that actually change the course, or basically negate his theory? So I would love to know if he could make a comment on that particular publication, because clearly we need to listen to some of his brains on this topic. But basically, here are some of the treatments against IgG4 antibodies. We should start monitoring this on a greater level. So this is more like a hope that scientifically we will start looking and investigating this on a greater level. And if you have vaccinated yourself with mRNA injections and you were not infected prior to that, you might consider looking at your IgG4 antibody levels in case they are higher than they should be, and in case they are on the rise. And the reason why is because then you might consider taking certain actions to negate any potential problems that such antibodies could cause. All right, so that's all I have for you in this video. It's a video I wanted to make for a while, and just wanted to say once again, thanks for your support. I wanted to remind you quickly that I was invited to a conference that's already been all recorded. The registration has been open for a while. Please check it out. The conference is dedicated to long COVID as well as chronic fatigue syndrome. And clearly it's a big issue because apparently it's fairly common. So just wanted to say thank you, because that's thanks to your support of the videos. So really what I'm saying is thank you for supporting me, supporting the channel, sharing this knowledge. And thank you for all your donations as well. I always forget to say that. And also check out my Patreon channel, where I add additional content as well that does not necessarily make on this channel as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the future, everyone. And bye for now.